everyone, I hope you're doing well, and it's Saturday, which means it is time for the news, because the narrative is shaping up. Darkshore has been revamped, and a new truth has been revealed about the Wrathgate cinematic, and Diablo Immortal also had slides relating to its microtransactions leak, and man, they look really, really nasty. Lore lovers, this is a big episode for you, but if you don't want spoilers, I will put a link with the timecode that just skips ahead to the Wrathgate interview, Darkshore Revamp, and Diablo Immortal microtransaction slides. First though, big thanks to everyone who helps the channel out over on Patreon. Over there you can get those fine boys, as well as a whole bunch of stuff. Yogg Saron early access video went up yesterday. I've got a vlog coming out today, and their support means a lot, especially in these Article 13 times, which honestly are kind of terrifying. So they're awesome, a massive help. And let's get into the news. So first up, Talanji. Now, the most recent build of the PTR has really led to a lot of narrative content being data mined, and well, this is in the form of audio from a cinematic. Now, this audio covers Talanji's reaction to her father's death. Of course, Rastakhan made a deal with Bomsamdi in return for his aid against Zal, and that bound not only him, but also his bloodline to Bomsamdi, making him the patron Loa of the Zandalari, just like Razan used to be. After seeing this, most of us knew that Rastakhan's days were numbered, and of course he is eventually killed by Alliance forces, and when he is dying, he asks for Talanji's forgiveness. She doesn't really know why, but as always, it's best to let Bomsamdi do the talking.
What have you done to me?
Oh, he didn't tell you about our bargain? Shame on him.
And yeah, man, he's just so well voice acted, it's so much fun. Anyway, so at this point, Talanji realizes that something is up with Bomsamdi, but she doesn't really have time to dwell on things. The Alliance has to be pushed back to the docks, and it's pretty much her job to lead, meaning that it's my job to speculate. Now, Talanji is a super interesting character because she seems to be approaching an established duality, but in a different way. Now, we've heard about the light and undeath a lot. They're not exactly things that go hand in hand. I mean, it's said that, say, Forsaken priests experience like excruciating pain whenever the light channels through them. Now, of course, more recently, we have a new type of light undead with Kalia Menethil. She is someone who is a light undead who, like, she wasn't resurrected. That's the important thing. She was not resurrected back to life. Instead, she's a new type of undead, one facilitated by the power of the light. Now, from what we can tell from the mechanics of all of this, being undead pretty much means your soul is pulled back from whatever death realm it went to, by default the Shadowlands, and it's kind of imperfectly reattached to your body. Well, maybe imperfectly, maybe differently, it's just hard to tell. Now, the point here is that Kali is a character of light and of death, of course in her case, as explored through the light. Well, Talanji is now a character of both light and death. Of course, troll priests, they're a little bit odd. They use the light through the Loa. In Talanji's case, this was Razan, who is now dead. Now, that's just like how, say, a human paladin uses the light through their religion, maybe how night elf priests wield the light through Elune, and how Tauren paladins wield it through Anshe. But for Talanji, the Loa from, whom her light came has been replaced by Bomsamdi. Now, technically, the light works off belief and willpower, so even though Razan is dead, Talanji still will be able to use the light, but Bomsamdi is now her patron Loa, so what does that actually mean for her? Well, it's very hard to tell because the nature of Rastakhan's deal was kept a complete mystery to us. We can work out quite a lot though. Now, this is going to make Bomsamdi a lot more powerful because a Loa's power grows in strength when they are being worshipped by more people. Well, things are very different now. He has the largest troll empire worshipping him. Bomsamdi's power then also grows when he has more souls under his guardianship, and given what happens with the siege of Atal Dazar, it seems very likely that he's going to have many more souls to take care of, and therefore quite a lot more power. Now, the big question is whether Talanji is going to uphold her side of the bargain. Not doing so will incur Bomsamdi's wrath. This might be kind of hard for her though, because chances are Bomsamdi, he's not going to love her use of the light. The two of them don't seem particularly compatible in the long run, and right now, Death has pretty bad public relations in the form of Sylvanas. So that's the generic push and pull of these character motivations, but what about the deal itself? Well, we don't really know what the deal is, and that's almost certainly on purpose, and it's probably going to be revealed in some sort of big dramatic fashion. Now, I'm going to leave this topic by reminding you of something. There are quests around Bomsamdi's temple where a mother sacrifices her daughter pretty much to stave off death. Now, suffice to say, she does not get her wish. Well, if Talanji does not pull the deal, I can't imagine it being good for Rastakan's spirit. But that's not all for Death, because a bunch of Sylvanas lores came out and, well, it's time to talk about it because she really does not come off too well here. So, there's two things. The first one is the ditching of Rexxar and Valtois. So the two of them, along with the player, get sent on a mission by Sylvanas to break Lady Ashvane out of the Toldagor prison. The whole thing is a success. It's a job well done. Everyone should be pleased. So how could Sylvanas muck this one up? It's really simple. She's just needlessly horrible. So we hand in Ashvane, and what happens? Well, Sylvanas doesn't let us board the boat. She just sails away, with us still stuck on a Kultiran jail that we broke into and out of, which of course spurs on some conversation.
Seems we need to find our own way back.
Such is the way of things. This war has taken many turns. It seems to me our current path is perilous.
Indeed, my friend. The Horde is at a crossroads once again.
And man, this lore is really odd. Now, I get they're trying to show that Sylvanas is a controversial leader and, the way she is, it just alienates people. But this is a little bit silly. There's no narrative reason to leave everyone behind. There really isn't a solid character motivation either, especially from Sylvanas' perspective, because these two people are like two of her closest allies. She just charged them with a highly dangerous and important mission that they succeeded in. I mean, hell, you might think that Rexxar's a big old softie, but remember what he said about Jaina going too far and having to be stopped in Stormsong? So, he's not the biggest fan of the Alliance, and they've really ticked him off. Now, this incident does pale in comparison to what she's going to do next, but remember that, Rexxar's pissed, Valtois' pissed. What happens next? Well, after the burial ceremony for Rastakan, Sylvanas talks about her special plan. So we all go to her ship, and we come across the coffin of Derek Proudmoore, who she then raises. Now, Bane is immediately pissed, and rightly so. The other Horde leaders don't really say too much, and she says that her plan is to make the Proudmoore family pay for killing Rastakan, so we can assume that she wants Derek to act as an assassin of sorts. Now that seems bad enough, but it kind of gets worse, because what do they do with the newly reanimated Derek? They just pin him up to a wall and leave him there. Now you later go to visit him with Bane, and honestly, it's quite horrible.
Please, help me. I don't know what's happened. What's been done to me? I remember the battle. Orcish dragon riders. I was dead, wasn't I? But for how long? I am not quite alive, and yet... Oh, I don't understand this. Oh, please. Yes, you please! How is this possible? Tell me, where is my father? My mother? Jaina, Tancred. No, please, I'm so alone. Don't leave me alone.
This is wrong. There is no honor in it. Her deeds disgrace us all. We must set things right before the Horde loses everything that made us strong.
So first up, the VO for Derek is really fantastic here, and they did a great job. But yeah, we can see this further drives Bane away from Sylvanas, and when you later ask Valtois about this, she says, I was skeptical of the Forsaken when I first joined the Horde, but, that she was assured that they chose their state of undeath willingly. But that this, what she sees now, well, to her, the Nightborn suffered greatly under the Legion's heel. She talks about the atrocities that she witnessed, and that basically she's reminded of them now, and that's where she's going to leave it for now. Now just remember how bad things were for the Nightborn, so from her perspective there's hardly any stronger words that she could use while still being polite. So Bane is pissed, the Nightborn are pissed, Rexxar's pissed, Saurfang's already left, the Horde seemingly has their ass handed to them in Darkshore, and Sylvanas is going about raising people over there, and that's actually a perfect lead into the topic of the Lich King and free will, because the entire point of Sylvanas' Forsaken was that they had free will. Well, look here. Derek is raised up, and free will is clearly not an option for him. Furthermore, look what she does to him. She tortures him, she pins him up to a wall, Do you know who did that? Like, exactly? The Lich King, to Bolvar. There's a very clear parallel there, especially when we think about Sylvanas' role in Bolvar's death, and yeah, more about that in a minute. Now, this also raises questions about Darylin and co. over in Darkshore. Blizzard got kind of blasted for how they wrote them, where they were instantly anti-alliance upon being raised up, and especially that just made no sense because of how they lived and died. Well, if Sylvanas is somehow forcing her will on them, as the Lich King did to her, then it makes sense, though at the expense of Sylvanas, kind of making her look like a cartoon villain. And then finally, striking up a deal with Ashvane, that's a little odd because Ashvane was in league with Ashara, as was Zul. So Sylvanas isn't really getting into good company here, but as I think we can see with the loss of, or the loss at dazar'alor, she might be getting a bit more desperate. Though, do note that the Darkshore stuff, that kicks off before the raid, so that's not what motivates her in the raising up of people. So that's the 8.1 stuff, but there's more to talk about with Sylvanas because she kind of did the Wrathgate. Now, this is through an interview with Alex Afrasabi with Eurogamer, and in that interview, Afrasabi says, "I've heard these discussions on the internet about how she's going off the rails, but is she? I've been writing Sylvanas personally since 2006, and this is pretty much the Wrathgate and the Blight and the Forsaken in character. Those were all under Sylvanas' orders. What we're seeing now is an escalation of the plan Sylvanas has. Clearly, we're in the middle of that." Now, this is a pretty interesting comment because previously, like at the time of Wrath, it didn't really look like she had a massive amount to do with it, but Chronicle made it very clear that she ordered the creation of the plague and it left further involvement kind of up to mystery. As an example, did she know about Varamathras' plot? Did she decide to use the Wrathgate to maybe manipulate the Horde into cleaning house for her? That absolutely would be in line with how she is portrayed in BFA, but I think that's kind of the problem. Alex said that he has been writing her since 2006. Now, first of all, that doesn't prove anything. That is an appeal to authority, which is really one of the worst ways to defend something. But anyway, like, what he says does kind of make sense about where the character is, but it does make it clear that there's a disconnect between the player perceptions of the story and his perception. It's one of those tricky things about writing, because the writer has the full plot in their head along with knowledge of where it goes. They have the complete character motivations in their head, and even maybe some of the scrapped narrative plans that they would have had at, one point, which would have reinforced their version of the character. But you see, that's the tricky thing about an MMO. Authorial ownership of work is kind of like dying anyway, because your work really does exist in the mind of the reader. There is no medium where it is more dead than an MMORPG though. And that makes it very tricky for people like Alex who have got to write a character-driven story for an MMO. In a live game that is spanning years, your audience is probably going to do more in their heads with your characters than you're able to. And I think when writing an MMO, that is really something that you should take into account. So to me, this thing, it does kind of make sense on all sides. As for the narrative, well, Sylvanas using the plague to kill Arthas, it makes sense. That was her only real purpose at that point, which is shown by how she then tossed herself off Icecrown once that goal was accomplished. She probably didn't care too much about the Alliance and the Horde or their leaders, so looking at the Battle of Wrathgate, she probably saw it was going poorly, she had this plague, so she probably thought, yeah, well, we've just got to use it, we've got to end the Lich King, and she just knew that she could also just dump the blame on a rogue apothecary and a dreadlord. So that does kind of make sense, but it does lead me into overall thoughts on the writing, because all of these topics have reignited discussion about the quality of the writing in the game, and I think for good reason. I mean, some of it is pretty much it's fairly on the nose. Overall, I think that broad strokes, the lore is quite cool, but I think that Blizzard's storytelling weaknesses do shine through with the characters. They're pretty decent at doing signature, epic moments, the kind of thing Blizzard are known for, big cheesy moments, but the character stuff's been a bit strange. There's been a lack of subtlety in really cases where subtlety is demanded. Sylvanas is so transparently evil, silly, and wholly inept that, she only really wins because the script says she does. We're told she's a master strategist, and that's fine in paper, but in-game, we're shown somebody who is emotionally reactive and is just devoid of people skills. She alienates almost everyone around her. The faction war is driven by the strength of her personal will, and not really the demands of the war, it would seem. They haven't really focused on making the war feel believable, and that's really why there's such a large disconnect. I think players get that these actions are supposed to seem really important, but at the end of the day, they're sloppily done where they kind of feel like fanfiction sometimes. Now, the defense is that the consequences of all this will make sense later, but that really doesn't excuse a poorly paced narrative that often doesn't understand the mind and the emotional state of the people who are playing through it, especially when the narrative is then okay to spend loads of time, say, doing silly hijinks with Gallywix. Now, Argus worked out really well because Argus was simple, but it was very big. It was a big, simple story. It was like a big bag of chili heatwave Doritos. You know it's not high art, but it's fun. This narrative, though, I think it shows the dangers of trying a little bit too hard. Now, I think that this team could deliver a compelling, if a bit cheesy, single-player narrative campaign. I think the problem is translating their narrative ambitions into an MMO that takes into account their players being, distinct characters in the world, rather than their players inhabiting the role of an existing character. And I think it just sometimes feels like they're writing in a disconnected bubble, and that's really why they just stumble from criticism to criticism, honestly, in a pretty predictable manner. With the faction war, I would have just rather had a traditional war, free of silly stuff where just both sides have got a good reason to fight. And the drama comes from there being a legitimate war where people have to do things to, do the war, instead of this kind of weird, shocking Game of Thrones-esque version of the war, where really it's just characters doing shocking things, and it doesn't really feel like the logical, it just doesn't feel like there's a logical through line that's super well thought out. Really, to me, it does just seem like they've sacrificed a lot in order to make Saurfang have impact, and in the process, they've kind of undermined the believability of their story, which, funnily enough, kind of undermines the effectiveness of Saurfang's plot the most. But there is a bit of a silver lining to all of this. We do know that Blizzard are, putting in proper choice. They've talked about that at BlizzCon. We've, seen the narrative choice, window pop-up thing between Saurfang and Sylvanas. So as much as I am critical about quite a lot of how they're doing the faction narrative, I do think that that is the one area where it could really shine. And then looking forward, Mechagon will be really fun. I think Ashara will be really fun. And then we'll be on to Old Gods. So we actually might be over the worst of it by this stage, but still doesn't take away from the fact it's all a bit weird. Next up though, we've got something that's really cool. Darkshore has been revamped for the warfront, but yeah, we just see a fair few and pretty interesting things. We've got new warfront areas, we also have a rebuilt Oberdine. As always though, show don't tell, so here's a little montage that I put together. And finally, Diablo Immortal. Yeah, we've got a bit of a weird leak. So NetEase posted an image and then very quickly deleted it, but that of course did not stop Reddit from getting it. And the contents of this image don't look that good. It's a meeting between Blizzard and NetEase that's covering microtransactions. Now, the man giving the talk is Li Yang, who is the NetEase side producer of Diablo Immortal. The title of the slide is Gear Enhancement, and it's explaining a system that's basically the same as in other NetEase ARPGs. So in these games, upgrading gear is a really important part of progression, but doing so requires materials, and whenever you try to do it, there's a success chance, such that upgrading gear is a roll of the dice that costs resources. Now, you can purchase items to increase that upgrade success chance for real money. So in short, honestly, it's one of the worst ways to monetize a game from a consumer's perspective, and doubly so because it's a game where social status is tied to gear. So players who want a good guild and a good group to compete, they're going to feel pressure to invest more. Now, this is a wildly profitable model as shown in the other NetEase ARPGs. Of course, though, it could not look worse for Blizzard, especially because this happened only a week after they were quoted in interviews as saying they haven't talked about monetization because they were focusing on making the game look fun. And yeah, it's kind of rough. Now, look, this kind of makes sense. Monetization is at the core of the design of these games. These games are centrally designed around the monetization mechanic. Now, there are times that can be done respectfully. Maybe a game that's all about optional, cosmetics, but power progression is untouched and it's a free game, so it's okay. But in a gear where it is about power progression, it's a big no-no. Now, the charitable impression is that this is the business model for the Chinese market. That would kind of make sense. Let's be real. This game is almost entirely made for the world's largest single market. They just want to make money from China, and this game probably does not have to do well in the EU or US to be a success. I actually wouldn't be surprised if it launched in Western regions with a separate business model, but if it does launch with this one, they're going to get roasted. Most of all, I kind of feel bad for the D4 devs because, first of all, development for that game seems to have been troubled, but they've then just had this random co-production appear and completely tank the public perception of the IP they've been pouring 4 years of their lives into, which is just rough. And then, I mean, obviously, if you're for a fan of Diablo, none of this is great news. Now, of course, I do need to say this is one slide from one presentation. The next slide could have been proposing a different system. This also isn't super official, but I mean, the people are pictured in it, so they obviously were there. But overall, though, it is just a bad look for Blizzard, and this continuing Diablo Immortal thing is just real rough, especially when you then hear, Alan Adams say that their top talent is working on mobile games for all IPs. Which is really rough, because if I'm then thinking, say, I'm a StarCraft 2 fan, right? It's my first Blizzard love in terms of games. It would be kind of sad if maybe the person who could have been leading a new StarCraft title is instead working on a mobile game. Now, look, I understand it entirely from the business sense, and, I'm not against profit or, companies doing all that stuff, obviously, but I will admit, it doesn't feel right, especially for a company like Blizzard, who, more than most companies, their name has carried real weight in the minds of people. It's why BlizzCon is such a phenomenon. But if that starts to change, then yeah, it really is quite rough. And I suppose the thing about top talent, it's right. So let's just say you're doing a startup. The most important thing you can do is hire good people, because company culture, culture comes from your first few hires and then it expands out, and getting good people to establish a team, that sets the tone for a whole project. Now, with Blizzard's top talent, so the people who will be leading teams and leading sub-teams within those teams, if they're all going on to mobile projects, it does run the risk of there being a brain drain on other titles, right? The ones that maybe the core audience would care about a little bit more. A little bit of a bummer with Diablo Immortal and some of the background talk about Blizzard right now. I really hope they're able to come out with announcements and releases that make players more happy with them again. I want all of their core franchises to do really well. Obviously, I want StarCraft 3, I want Diablo 4, whatever else they have working for Diablo. I think that they're at a bit of a crossroads right now in their public perception, and I think once they lose it, it's going to be extremely hard to get it back. But there you go, that is it for the news. Definitely an interesting week with all that Blizz and meta talk. As for the narrative, yep, it just to be honest, I just want to hear what you've got to say in the narrative. I'm super keen to just sort of feel the temperature of things, how everybody feels about it, because, it definitely is a little bit odd, especially for the Horde players. Now, if you're an Alliance player, then, you've got a pretty simple faction who is, at this stage, transparently the good guy, so I guess there's a lot less conflict there. Of course, it's always possible that this narrative choice that I'm really excited about, and when Alex was talking about that narrative choice with Saurfang versus Sylvanas, and there being proper results and implications for players depending on their choice, that I was really excited when he was talking about that. So don't take me wrong. There is hope for some really cool stuff happening that, unlike some of the criticisms that I have now, could actually be leveraging the fact that it's an MMO to tell a good story by having players within the Horde choose different sides. That could be awesome. But anyway, let me know what you think. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.